Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to this week's edition of Imperial as One's Belonging series, where we explore the lived experiences of people from the Black, Asian, and minority ethnic backgrounds, to hear their stories, to understand what it is that's helped them to gain their sense of identity and sense of belonging. And this week, I'd like to just welcome our guests. As I say, every week we have a really special guest. And this week, our special guest is Eric Sterling. And Eric Sterling is the CEO of Sterling Academy Youth. He's a postgraduate student studying racial equity and community leadership at S.A.Y University. And Eric, we want to just say a really big thank you because you really are a role model. Thank you for being here. I'm going to kick off with my usual first question, and that is to please give us a little sense about what it was that gave you your sense of identity, your sense of belonging as you were growing up.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you, Wayne, for having me. Hello and good afternoon to everyone who's joining us. So I'm Eric Sterling, born in the UK, so born in London. To answer your question around what gave me my sense of belonging from a young age, so I am the child of two parents who were not born in the UK. They were born in Jamaica, so I'm fully Jamaican. Coming from a large family, my parents came to the UK towards the end of their teenage years, so did their education in Jamaica and came to the UK and met one another, sort of dived straight into work to support the family in the UK, and got married and had children, and me being one of six, so I'm number four. So I guess when it comes to my sense of belonging and how I sort of like found that, I guess two answers really. Culture played a strong part in sort of like my identity as a male child, as a Black child, as a child who attended church. So there was very much a religious element in my household. Good morals, having good manners, being polite, being kind. That bestowed a sense of sort of like gratitude and appreciation. And I guess from a cultural perspective, I guess the sense of belonging came from two parents who very much spoke with an accent, a Jamaican accent, very much in touch with the food and the culture. Our family networks were predominantly also people from the Caribbean, and I guess academically too, being encouraged to work hard and to do the best at school. And I guess I was quite fortunate as a child, being quite blessed with a good reading age at a young age, and sort of being able to do well academically too. So that gave me an insight, and also the confidence to sort of get on with tasks, to engage in independent reading, to sort of just kind of like sit back and observe, and to learn from my environment and from those around me.
I'm going to ask a quick question about your family, because you said you're one of six.
Yes.
So, right, and one of six, and you're kind of like almost in the middle, kind of like snap in the middle, right? So when you were referring to like your siblings, or the by the time they get down to like 4, 5, and 6, I suppose the dynamics for your parents slightly change. Would you say, how would your siblings say you were treated compared to them? Or how would you say your younger siblings were treated compared to you? And was the aspirations the same for all of you?
I think it's an interesting one, because I think whenever you speak to siblings, whenever you speak to parents, they'll always say each child is different. And the parenting experience for each child, whether it's your firstborn or whether it's your last, Sometimes the firstborn is considered the experiment child, if you want to use that phrase. You become more confident as you become sort of like more skilled at being a mother or a father. So I think for me, I had older brothers who I could look up to, kind of see what they were up to, navigate some of their interests, be more emotionally intelligent. And I guess to answer your question around aspirations, so I was born in the 80s. So my older brothers were born sort of like late 70s. So when I was a child, I guess sort of like, 90s. And I guess the world was slightly different, I would say, in terms of what education sort of like looked like. A more of a push. Tony Blair was the prime minister at the time when I was sort of going through secondary and tertiary education, further education. We had EMA. There was a lot more sort of like pressure on schools to ensure that kids were academically leaving with better grades. So, and of course, if anyone's familiar with the S.A.Y report, which was published in the 1980s, there were findings around schools being educationally, it being an educationally racist system, whereby ethnic minority children in different ways were not being adequately prepared or with the skill set to go on and to thrive. So I guess the short answer to your question is, perhaps there were differences, and I think they'll probably say so too.
So tell me something a little bit about your school, because you said earlier that you academically you were able, and so you pushed yourself. Was that reciprocated in the way in which the teachers, because you just mentioned about the S.A.Y report and institution, well, they didn't use the word institutional racism at the time, but they did say that children from the Caribbean, the Cord report from 1972 also mentioned about the whole idea of children from West Indian heritage being disadvantaged, made to feel subnormal, etc. For you, as you were going through schooling, did any of that resonate, or looking back, do you think any of that resonated with you as you were going through, or were you did you not encounter that?
Absolutely. So I feel, so if I look at my primary education, where I attended one primary school, began in nursery aged 4, and remained in that same school until aged 11. I was top of the class. I remember myself, maybe and 2 other Asian children, and it was us who did the extension paper when it came to SATs. I remember anyone who's familiar with the SAT system from back then, you had the extension level 6 paper. And I remember being put forward to do that. And this was without any sort of like tuition or any sort of like extra push, which is often the case for children who are working at that level. And I would say is I'll just have to thank God really for how I was able to operate at that level. But interestingly, when I went to secondary school, there was a decline in my academic performance. I was no longer working at that level. So much so that by the time I got to year 11, astonishingly, for a number of subjects, I was entered to sit foundation papers, which ultimately caps your ability to get grades above a C. And as you mentioned as part of my introduction, I spent the last 9 years in education, which has given me a phenomenal and quite reflective and at sometimes quite brutal insight into how the educational system sometimes works, and
Mm-hmm.
schools are measured on their C and above grades.
Yeah.
So if they feel, for whatever reason, a child, whether they're unsure whether they'll get the C, or whether they're unsure that there are teachers who are geared towards supporting some students, or if they just feel a plethora of reasons, sometimes it could be from a behavior perspective, they just won't necessarily enter that child for the higher paper, maybe to keep classes smaller. Some teachers may suggest that some children are difficult to teach, so strategically they'll just sort of like be placed in other groups. So yeah, I mean, so I guess that in itself is a reflection of, I mean, I kind of look at that as a failing in my education, and how the education system let me down as someone who was a high attainer, who was then subjected to capped grades. I remember sort of like, you know, getting top marks, but as far as it could have been was a C. And
Can
yeah,
I just interject at that point
of
then?
course.
Because you were entered for the top papers at primary school. So the teachers recognized your ability, recognized your talents, nurtured you so that you were able to actually be able to sit the higher paper. And then in secondary schools, that just went up. Now, I'm going to ask a couple of questions. I'm going to, right? Was that down to peer pressure? So was it the influence of peers? Was it the lack of aspiration from the teachers, or the expectations from the teacher? Can you pinpoint anything which you could say could have indicated any of these things, if that makes sense?
Yeah. So if I think about the type of student I was during secondary school, I was always present, so there weren't any issues of absences or absconding from school. So I was always physically in school. My behavior was good. I could be challenging in the sense of sometimes around fairness or around consistency with teachers, and sometimes I would express that. And I guess as an adult and as a teacher myself, some teachers will welcome that and be open to have a discussion, depending on, or, and then there are other teachers who just simply see that as completely inappropriate. Would rather sort of not engaging any sort of exchange or negotiation with a child in terms of their understanding on a perspective. So when I think about conflict, I can remember sort of I can definitely remember at least two teachers who there was a clash because they just didn't expect a child such as myself to have an opinion, or to perhaps, and it was never rude, it was never sort of like swearing or anything like that, but just not welcomed. To answer your question around aspiration, we know we live in a society where there are differences. If you look at the academic attainment between the different ethnic minority groups, not all ethnic minority groups achieve at the same rate, and this continues into GCSEs and later at A levels and at degree level, and is reflected ultimately in the professional world, in the workplace. Within the Black community, and there are a bunch of reasons. I mean, we could be here for hours, but the Caribbean community tends to do less well, if we're going to talk about the Black community, than the African community. And I guess with an understanding of those attainment rates, there's a lot of work to be done from an educational perspective on how we're supporting those groups to close those gaps. So was I inspired? Was I pushed? No, is my short answer.
Right. Okay. Didn't have any role models in the school, any teachers that would kind of like support you to say, come on, Eric, you can do this. You didn't have any, did you have anyone who could intercede or advocate on your behalf to get you to the to try to push you to get you to the next level?
Excuse me. Yes. So I remember one teacher, and I've not connected with her since leaving year 11. Her name, Miss Harbert.
Mm-hmm.
She taught us RE.
Mm-hmm.
Lisa Harbert taught me RE. And for anyone who knows anything about RE, it's very much a subject which invites discussion, invites critical thinking, invites opinions, and invites debate. And she was phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
A white teacher,
Mm-hmm.
white lady, Oxford educated, and did the best in her subject, got top grades in her class. And I guess there was a relationship there. There was a culture of excellence which was encouraged, and it was a subject which I enjoyed.
Mm-hmm.
She, for me, always stands out as that teacher who made my experience.
Wow, fantastic. I'm going to push on from here because I'm just wary of time, and there's a couple
Yes,
of things which I want us to cover in terms
sure.
of like your experience from what you've said about your secondary school experience. It wasn't one which was, someone would say, a stellar experience to say, I'm from this experience, I want to go on to do higher education and stuff like that. Okay. Especially when you felt that you were limited and limits were put on you, they were barriers from you progressing. What was it then that kept you in the game, that kept you saying, well, I can achieve, I know I can achieve, I want to go on to do university level studies, etc. Where did that motivation come from?
Yeah, good question, Wayne. So, despite the restrictions which were placed on my GCSE attainment, I had enough GCSEs
Mhm.
to go on to do A levels.
Right.
Now, I grew up in a part of London, Northwest London, the borough of Brent.
Yeah.
And at the time, I believe, I think the statistics were 1 in 20 Caribbean boys were leaving school with enough GCSEs to go on and do A levels. And for
Hmm.
anyone who's unsure, A levels is the sort of step before going to do a degree if you're not
Hmm.
doing a foundation year. So I kind of got my results, and I remember a number of my peers also getting their results, people who lived in my local area,
Hmm.
people I'd see at my local park or at
Hmm.
my local youth club. And they were really disappointed with their grades, really
Hmm.
disappointed. And although I wasn't terrifically excited and sort of like overjoyed of mine, they were far better than my peers.
Hmm.
And it made me realize, well, actually, I've got options here.
Hmm.
Um, I then went on to college, a local college, chose a bunch of subjects, which included what did I choose now? Music technology. um, yeah. What did I choose? Music technology, business studies, law, and ICT.
Right.
And again, at that point, there was no guarantee that university was part of the pathway.
Hmm.
No consideration, quite frankly. What we know about education is that attainment is usually driven, and direction is usually driven by role models or parents.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned at the start, my parents, high work ethic, never took a day off work, encouraged to go to school, to work really hard. But in terms of the sort of like detailed sort of like strategies to navigate the educational system, they just didn't have that.
Yeah.
So I guess it was a lot of kind of like discovery as I went along.
Were you the first in your family? I know you had older siblings. Did they pursue further education after GCSEs, or were you the
No,
first?
but
You were the
I was the first, yes.
so it's the first in generation to
Hmm.
actually go in beyond just secondary school education. So you had no one to role model off.
Exactly.
Right, right, right. So how did you navigate that space then? Did you find anyone who was willing to take you under their wing to mentor you in that sense, to say, Eric, we see your potential, this is how you can do it? Or was it all a total um, voyage of discovery?
It actually was, Wayne. I'll be completely honest with you. I remember the second year of A level, and UCAS was being spoken about. And knew nothing about UCAS before this. Personal statements we were being told to put together. We were being told about universities and league tables, and sort of like being advised to go on open days and check out what these different institutions are like. And I can tell you, I did go on some open days, but I actually went on my own.
Right.
So I actually sort of like organized coaches to Bristol and coached up to Nottingham to sort of like go and sort of like check out what these universities were like. I didn't know what I was looking for.
Mm-hmm.
Had no idea what I was looking for. In fact, I remember going to one university, sort of like turning up and sort of like arriving and then sort of like not even interacting with any lecturers, just feeling quite like I didn't quite belong there. I didn't really
Yeah.
know what to do. I just saw sort of like people with their parents.
Mm-hmm.
But I knew this was something that I was being advised to do as part of helping me decide which universities were best for me.
Mm-hmm.
So no, to answer your question, I think I sort of was lucky to connect with people who were able to guide me at university, and it
Mm-hmm.
was by getting involved with a scheme which had a focus of supporting Black students who had an interest into going into law.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that provided an opportunity for me to kind of like realize that, wow, there's been this kind of like gulf in support, which I haven't had, and which kind of seemed normal because in my community, which I came from, quite a lot of people just didn't go on to university. So
Yeah.
I meant, we spoke about within my family, but that was also the case amongst the people who I grew up with in my
Yeah.
local area. No one went to university. I remember people sort of my peers either being really proud and congratulating me for going to university, or kind of having an issue with me studying and kind of getting into some really sticky situations. And I now understand that to be driven a lot by jealousy,
Mm-hmm.
and also a complex whereby feeling quite threatened, um beef even,
Mm-hmm.
believe it or not. I remember groups of people sort of complaining that I was going to college too much.
Oh my.
Yeah, I was going to college too much, and I was no longer sort of like present, and then sort of like finding excuses to kind of sort of have an issue with me and
Yeah.
threatening kind of come to the college and beat me up. So it was a really sort of like weird time.
That last statement kind of like just threw me. I'll be honest with you. The fact that you want to go and get an education, but there were people who previously were your peers, previously were you who you would consider your friends,
Yes.
turning against you because you wanted to pursue something different to what they were pursuing.
Yeah, and that's completely true. I'm not making it up. No reason to make it up. And again, it was kind of like just seeing that our values are different. So
Mm,
even as you might describe friends, you and I could be buddies, and today you're not around, and someone else is now sort of like slagging Wayne off and speaking
mhm.
about you in a really degrading way. And I'm sort of like thinking, well, hold on, if you two are closer than myself and him, and you're having these conversations, what's happening when I'm not present? And just kind of people's interest, what they were
Yeah.
pursuing, I just realized this wasn't necessarily the best kind of friendship energy to be around, and sort
Mhm.
of like drawing myself from those circles. But then yeah, that wasn't sort of like received well.
So give me, there's so much I want to unpack with you. So what was it that then triggered you to say, you know what, I'm going to university? Did you go straight after you finished your A levels? Was that the pursuit, or what happened?
Yeah, so I went straight afterwards. So in my final year, my story gets even more interesting because in my final year, my girlfriend and I discovered we were going to have a baby.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So during my A levels, actually, at the age of 19, I became a father.
Wow. Okay.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And
Go on.
yeah, this is let's unpick this. And my son was born on my A level exam day, my A level law exam day. So it was an incredible day. I was able to get 100 percent, 120 out of 120 and 90 out of 90 in the papers, and he was born later on that evening. Um, and then I had the set of exams 2 days later in June. Um, but the plan was to go to university, and yeah, stuck with that plan. And graduated 4 years later. And at that point, he was 4, and then he began school.
I'm going to put my congratulations on the birth of your son, but
Thank you.
congratulations on the grades which you managed to achieve, even in that state of that state. I don't even know what to. What was going through your?
I
What was
consider
going?
coming from Crystal what? But can I tell you something, Wayne and Crystal, and anyone else who is listening? It, there's, as we know, academia and the professional sector, and being a student, being a parent, particularly a young one, is kind of seen as incongruent, sort of doesn't quite tally together. And I guess social stigma attached to that, in some ways, is considered an act of recklessness, or an act of, call it whatever you like. So it wasn't something which I was discussing with my teachers. It wasn't something which I felt comfortable sharing with my A-level teachers to say, well, guess what? As well as preparing for these A-levels, I'm actually sort of between, lectures, 3 periods, accompanying my girlfriend to the antenatal clinic. And I think it might have been useful in hindsight to have sort of updated my teachers, but I think I was scared of judgment.
Okay.
Mm.
Okay. So your girlfriend and yourself have a child, or are in the process of having a child. You're studying for your A levels. Was she still studying at the same time, or how did that pan out? And how did, when the child came along, and because you still went off to university, what was the childcare setup? Because you're a university student, could you engage with student life, or your responsibilities and everything else? So give us a little insight into that, please.
Yeah, I mean, it was stretched, to be fair. I read law as a
Mm-hmm.
degree, and anyone who studied law will know it involves lots of reading.
Mm-hmm.
I lived away.
Mm-hmm.
I lived away from London, and would then spend the weekends commuting. Luckily, I had a really supportive family. So I guess having that extended big family and parents, they really supported me when I wasn't present.
Mm-hmm.
Give God, the thanks for that.
Mm-hmm.
I was able to leave university with a 2:1 degree.
Fantastic.
Thank you. So it was a success, and I just really give God thanks for how it all worked out for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it's amazing. Your story is amazing. I'm just thinking about then what you've done in terms of giving back. How did you get to the stage where you are the CEO of Sterling Academy? What was it that led you down that route? You studied law, but I know earlier on you said you've always also been in the teaching field. So give us a little bit of that journey, how from doing your law degree into the education sector, and what is it that you want to see changed, as it were?
Yeah, so did a degree in law and graduated in 2010.
Hmm.
Um, Again, it was only perhaps in fact, it was my penultimate year of my degree. It dawned on me what steps I ought to be taking in
Hmm.
terms of acquiring a training contract, in terms of the next stages to becoming a lawyer, the LPC and the costs attached to that, and the training contract, and etc. etc. So the credit crunch was something which happened in 2008.
Yeah.
Which had a massive impact on number of sectors, commercial sectors. So there was a decline in recruitment in those areas.
Hmm.
Um, so by the time I graduated, I hadn't secured a training contract. And I also, was a parent of a 4-year-old, which meant that I did a number of placements and internships, but I also had to look at sort of like meaningful work, which was able to translate these qualifications into an income.
Yeah.
So prior to going into education, I spent some time in the civil service,
Right.
and that was an enjoyable experience working at Whitehall for a government department. Um, However, I had this calling for education.
Hmm.
I felt as though I wished to work with young people. I felt like it would be a good role for me, a good fit.
Hmm.
And I guess the father in me, um, it seemed to make sense as well to
Hmm.
support my own son in his academic journey. And I guess it could be argued some of the areas where I could have benefited from extra support. I then kind of sort of thought, well, how could I bring value to, my own child as well as children from similar backgrounds such as my own.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like where my passion for working with young people come from. I'm really glad and really proud of my son who completed his GCSEs back in the summer
Yeah.
and did really well. He did
And
he did really well. There was no sitting or foundation paper. That's a generational progression
yeah.
that just wouldn't have happened. Yeah, but he smashed his sciences, got his A's in computer science as well as geography and maths. And he's now doing a good collection of A levels in maths, politics, and economics.
Fantastic. That cycle, because some people would have said you having a child at 19, at a very young age, that the prospects for your children may then, because you haven't established yourself, etc. But you've demonstrated that it's more about your aspirations and the way in which you choose for your children and for yourself, because you'll have been a role model for him.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'd like to think so. I like to think so. I mean, I often talk to him about what I'm up to. And right now I'm filming this, this interview's taking place in Birmingham.
Mm-hmm.
And I live in London. However, I've been up here for the Black Talent Award, which is yesterday was the inaugural celebration of Black talent held here in Birmingham. And I was presenting an award on behalf of my organization. I was one of the judges,
Yeah.
which involved going through finalists and deciding who the winner should be for the category. And, I've been speaking to my son about that since the summer, since I've been up here, and sort of selecting who the winners would be. And, on his way to school this morning, we had a chat and I told him it was really great. We had to kind of jiggle some plans tonight. I was due to take him to watch a basketball match because he's really into basketball. But by the time we finish this interview and I get back to London, it will be a bit late. So
Okay.
he's heading in with a friend instead. So he gets to go with a friend.
Okay.
So I'm sure
Okay.
he's kind of happy about that. Night away from dad. So I'll be meeting him at the end.
Yeah, but that in itself, the fact that again you've been able to provide something more than what you had. You've been able to provide someone who he can look to, who's got the knowledge of the system that he may well be going into, and that you'd aspire for him to go into, you know. And I like the fact that your organization is devoted to helping young Black people or young people to actually navigate these spaces which their parents may not be familiar with, or people in their community, as you've said, who would be pulling back. You know what, I'm gonna just see if there's anyone in the audience who wants to ask some questions. I'm not sure, right? But if not, mulling over that, you mentioned about the talent awards ceremony yesterday.
Yes.
Thinking about that ceremony, what was the thing which was really just not mind-blowing, but you thought, wow, this is when you thought about the whole ceremony and what it was trying to achieve?
Yeah, really good question. So it was the inaugural talent show award, which means it was the very first one. So I was invited to get involved back in May, perhaps June, and division actually began back in the pandemic. So there were more than 400 guests in the cricket ground based in Birmingham in the bank.
Yeah.
Oh, you know it?
Yeah.
I was avoiding saying the word as I can't quite pronounce it.
That's fine.
Yeah, so you know, Black people, Asian people, white people, you know, allies, supporters, finalists, winners, the whole shebang. Very well put together, immaculate detail in terms of a live orchestra playing music, red carpet, drinks, the audio, the live entertainment, the food was delicious, the music was excellent. So really well organized, and it was an opportunity for unsung heroes, if you wish to use that term, or just recognition of Black talent, people who are doing great things, you know, to be placed on a pedestal unapologetically and proudly.
Yeah.
Taking away from any other community's achievement, but literally celebrating what's working here. And I think I went back to what caught me as an inspirational moment. And I think it was that second year of university when I came across the director for law at the time. I think she worked for the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea. Her name is Gifty Adilla. And I was just so blown away that there was this Black woman who was the head of director for law at you know, one of the boroughs of the richest boroughs in the UK, and she spoke so well. And I remember her mentioning her son had just become a doctor, and I was sort of like, but how old must you be? Clearly she was old enough, but it was just those moments where I would kind of walk away and I just felt sort of like so overwhelmed and motivated. And they say what you see is what you can become. That representation means a lot. And if you don't have that representation, it can sometimes feel quite abstract. But I think what I'm taking away from yesterday is the recognition of visibility, the reinforcement of achieving well, and also the connections as well. I was able to cultivate some really good connections yesterday. I'm still at a stage in my organization where I am learning a lot as well as growing. So it was really good to connect with other people who've been in the field a lot longer than I have, who have been really gracious and kind in terms of offering support to me in order to get me to that next level as well.
See, Crystal's got her hand up. Crystal, could you ask your question, please?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Thanks, Eric. This has been great. And it would be fantastic if maybe your contact details can be popped in the chat or something, because I definitely think I'll want to speak to you later. But I do have a question, which was, sorry, is there an echo? I feel like there's an echo. Give me a second.
Oh, no. Hi, Crystal. I can hear you fine.
Fantastic. Okay.
Thanks for the question.
When you spoke about your friends who kind of, no longer wanted to be your friend because they thought that maybe you'd become a bit too uppity because you were going to university. Did you ever return to those friends? Because, one of the thoughts I've always had is you hear about communities building people up and supporting people, but then you also hear about this. This is not an unobserved phenomenon. This sense of, this is where you belong, this is where you are, this is who you are. And I'm wondering if when you had that ability to transition out of that, if you've ever thought about how you could actually change the mindset of those people that hang on to that sort of identity.
Yeah. So I guess, so imagine there being a big friendship group. So imagine the people who you may have played football with, the people you may have kind of got the same bus into school, the people you may have, as teenagers might have gone to your first house party together, or experienced your first girlfriends with. It was that sort of group. And I guess when I got to like 16, it wasn't like a complete sort of like cut off, I'm no longer interested. It was kind of like the direction the group was heading in, and sort of like kind of like on a criminal basis as well. So I guess the breakdown was even before university. This was at college level, and it got, I guess I've kind of maybe sanitized how bad it got for me for no particular reason, where almost my safety was at jeopardy in terms of like harm. There was one particular person who I went to church with who was part of that group. And if I were to see him today, I'd have a chat with him and, would talk. But as for the others, I know a few have gone to prison, and I know one was unfortunately killed a few years ago in terms of yeah, he's no longer here. And that actually hit me. Although he was someone I was not in touch with, when I found that out, I was really upset. Even went as far as sort of bringing a card and sort of like laying some flowers, and sort of wrote a note saying, although we're not friends, or we weren't friends for a while, we've come from the same background, and there are all these different institutional factors which almost amounts to people like us not achieving well. But their vision was very different to mine, and I don't think it would have taken a lot more than me returning to kind of shifted their mindset. It was bigger than me in terms of where they needed to go, or what their aspirations could have been.
That's a whole different kind of conversation in trying to understand people's mindsets, motivations, to getting out. I don't want to say getting out of the ghetto, but what is it that prevents somebody having that kind of ambition? I'm not going to say they aren't ambitious, because that's not even the right terminology either. It's the opportunities which could have, or the circumstance which could have enabled them to have made different choices. And we don't know the full intricacies of what those factors were.
Wayne, have you heard of that term or that phrase? It's a Jamaican phrase. I'm sure it might be used in other cultures, but it's called like crabs in a bucket.
Yeah.
So if you literally watch a bunch of crabs in a bucket, collectively they could support each other and get out of the bucket. But as soon as one sort of gets to the edge, a crab will just drag another crab down, and the cycle just continues.
Yeah.
and in the end, no crab leaves the bucket. I kind of felt it was a lot like that, because I wasn't the only one. There was another person who kind of went off and became a plumber. Yeah, and then in fact, like last year when my mum, you know, when there was a burst, I kind of reached out to him on LinkedIn, and he actually came and did the job, and that was kind of like really rewarding to kind of like connect with someone who we can now exchange services. But yeah, he also had a hard time when he got to a particular age with that group. And the interesting thing is, these people weren't necessarily stupid. They weren't necessarily superly deprived. Some came from like homes with you know, parents who owned mortgages and stuff like that. So it's kind of like interesting what drives some people to kind of be bad, basically, like be bad, you know, do road, if we're going to use that term. I wouldn't even say gangster. I would say kind of just almost, this is what I want to do, and this is kind of like the quickest and best way for me to be a success, whether it's attached to ego, whether it's attached to a sense of belonging. But I kind of enjoyed always sort of like using my mind and kind of sort of feeling proud of what I was doing. So that didn't really jump out to me.
Yeah. Eric, I'm just wary. Our time is up, believe it or not. And there's so much I still want to unpack. In terms of my final couple of questions, in terms of your organization, what help and support is it that you're providing, and what help and support is it that you need in your organization?
Oh, great question. So at the moment, we're still at a organic stage. So the schools I'm currently working with are schools who are part of my network. So teachers I've worked with, teachers I've connected with through the profession, and at the moment it's going well. In the sense of supporting schools who need extra help with young people who are engaging in. So at the moment, there's a theme around social media and managing social media, using it in a way whereby you're managing your feed in a way which is healthy and sort of safe for your mental health, as well as navigating all the toxic material on there. So I'm doing a lot of work with a number of schools in those areas, also around emotional intelligence. There's a workshop package at the minute around sense of belonging as well. One of the terms I've not mentioned in today's session is cultural navigation.
Okay.
And this term, cultural navigation, is one which has come up as part of my postgraduate studies recently. And it looks at how migrants navigate a culture which they're not from. So that could be the cultural norms, that could be the mannerisms, that could be the etiquette, and how one can thrive in a culture which they haven't got the generational background in. And that can also include navigating the workplace, navigating the academic sort of like rigmarole and so forth. And that can sometimes be a factor in terms of how different community groups are attaining or aren't attaining. So doing a bit of work around that. I'm always keen to, in terms of what help I could receive. I think that was one of the questions.
Yeah. What help is it that you need?
Yeah.
Would you say?
I mean, the help I guess I would need at the minute. So I guess my skill set is the content. I'm not like I was going to say I'm not an entrepreneur, but I guess I am now because I've but being an entrepreneur also involves like the technical stuff, and so the marketing side isn't quite where it's at, where it needs to be yet, in terms of sort of being sort of, you know, out there, as I mentioned at the start.
Visibility.
Visibility. So I mean, there are projects in terms of like working on, you know, like the website and so forth, which isn't up yet because I've been able to sort of like provide brochures to the schools I'm working with. There is an Instagram page if anyone would like to follow that. Do check out Sterling Academy Youth. One word, Sterling Academy Youth. That would be good. If you could share content, that's most useful as well. And yeah, I guess maybe sitting down with someone who's got a bit more experience in this area than I have, sort of flesh it out. That's always good. So here's a call for action if anyone would like to get in touch.
I think that that's what we're here for, to be honest. I think that's what we're here for, that we're here to provide that support, that network, to expand our networks. Yeah, we're interconnected. As you said, I like that crab analogy, because we're reaching up and we don't want to be reaching up and pulling down. We want the one who's got a little bit further pulling up so that the next one can get a little bit further and go above and beyond. Yeah, so we don't necessarily want to be crabs, but we want to connect. We don't want to pull down.
Yeah, let's help each other.
Let's help each other up. Yeah, and let's see what we can do. Yeah, definitely see what we can do.
And also anyone who is passionate about young people and would like to get involved, who would like to join my database as potential facilitators, do reach out also.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
Definitely. Eric, I just want to say a big thank you. I'm going to ask just one final question. This really is my final question. One final question, right? And that question is this. What advice would you have given to your, it's interesting because you've got a 16-year-old son, and normally I'd say, what advice would you give to your 16-year-old self? But I'm going to rephrase it. What advice have you given to your 16-year-old son?
I think the advice I often give him, it's fine to feel tired at times. It's fine to recognize that things are hard. It's fine to kind of have many doubts. That's natural. Things do get better. Things do get easier the more you do it. We're in a world now where there are far more opportunities and visibility of success. I think one of the advice I would give someone like myself is, regardless of your background, regardless of where you've come from or what your parents have done or not done, or your community's done or not done, with enough resilience, you could absolutely achieve the unthinkable. Don't place the caps on what you can attain because you aren't privately educated, for example, or because your godfather is a banker, or sitting in some city firm able to provide you with work placements. It's easy to say it doesn't matter, because we're in a world where there are privileges attached to different backgrounds. But what I would encourage a young person to do is just keep going, keep pushing. It might mean not everyone who you're currently connected with, you will remain connected with, and don't feel guilty about that. It doesn't mean sort of like cutting people off and putting two fingers up at them. It just means that, similarly, if you were to run a business, you might not get the most profit from recruiting your friends, because perhaps they haven't got the skill set or the experience to allow that business to thrive. And in some ways, you're a business in the sense of you want the ultimate success for yourself. So be kind to yourself, operate with good manners, treat people well, work hard, put in the work. It does get easier, and be okay with not completely knowing what exactly you want to do, but definitely aim high, have high expectations and aspirations for yourself. Don't allow anyone to sort of place limits on you, and you'll be fine.
Fantastic. Eric, a really big thank you for sharing your story and sharing your time with us this afternoon. And I know we're going to be in contact and we're going to connect. So that goes without saying. But I would also encourage others, let's share our talents, let's share our skills, our abilities, so that we can really propel and help the next generation to go above and beyond where we are right now. Okay, so I'm going to just let everyone know what's coming next week, but another really big thank you, Eric, for everything that you've done and are doing.
Thank you, and thank you to Crystal for the question and for the link, and thank you also to is it Kellyanne? Thank you, Kellyanne.
Kellyanne. Yeah, Kellyanne.
And thank you, everyone. If you would like to connect on the
LinkedIn
page, and also on LinkedIn, you can find.
I'll send the LinkedIn page as well.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So our guest next week is going to be Dr. Tanwir Belli, and she is a Dorothy Jackson Fellow at Imperial College based in the Reproductive and Developmental Biology department. It's going to be a really fascinating story. Her experience is quite amazing. And if you haven't seen some of the other videos which we've done or some of the other interviews, please go to our YouTube channel, which is tinyurl.com/belonging-IAO, where you'll be able to see some of the other videos. Nice little story about belonging. And as I say each week, none of this would have happened if we hadn't had so many people who were willing to share their stories of what has helped them to gain their sense of belonging. And the lessons we learn from them are really life lessons for all of us. So until next time, I just want to wish you all a good weekend and keep finding your place to belong. Thanks.